a key thing in the development of the town. And what happened at the time this plan was being prepared, there was a lot of discussion about Ipswich Airport coming to its final days, and also the large ransoms factory here, which is a lawnmower factory historically. Engineering factory, long established.
Agricultural and grass machinery, yeah.
So you had two big blocks of land there that were ripe for reallocation, and this has clearly resulted in Ravenswood, a sort of major new settlement right on the edge of town, which is there purely and simply because it's where the airport was. And it's quite interesting, the old airport buildings, control tower and so on, are listed as being historic and architectural interest, and those have been, even those have been converted to apartments. We're currently having a bit of battle with people wanting to put satellite dishes on them, spoiling their character, but that's another matter. And the ransoms site here was allocated as a sort of strategic employment site, and new roads have been put in, and new factories, new warehouses, some new offices. It was quite fortunate, I suppose, and both of these sites are located with very good access to the A14. And because Ipswich is a relatively small town, I was working in Greater Manchester before I came down here, and Ipswich seems so small by comparison. It's actually not that far into the town centre if you want to cycle, as some of our colleagues do, or use public transport. So the compactness of Ipswich is really quite a striking thing compared with many other towns. The other thing about the plan is, I suppose, the northern fringe here, which, as you can see, comprises, I suppose, in other boroughs, it might be known as the green belt. It's the wedge of land on the north side of town that's been open for a long time, as Bob explained, for historic reasons, and which people are pretty keen to keep that way. It's not a green belt, obviously, because beyond you have no major settlements. You get out to the villages of the sort of coastal area, but it's seen by townspeople, certainly that part of town, as a valuable open resource which they will fight very strongly not to have developed. Coming on to where the plan is taking us, the next plan has to take us up to 2021, that sort of time period. Ipswich's population is projected to grow over that time from about 120,000 to 140,000. So a key driver, although we do have to find employment sites, a key driver is to find more land for housing. Now, you'll all be familiar with the current topicality of the issues of flood risk. And again, as Bob mentioned historically, but certainly very, very much today, the potential for flooding, as you can see from this plan here. This is a map of flood zones 2 and 3, the Environment Agency flood zones, which are zones that are quite, in their terms, quite likely to flood as a result of a tidal surge. The flooding in Ipswich is tidal rather than fluvial, unlike Tewkesbury, so it comes in and goes out again. But we have a situation where the flood defences are inadequate and in a poor state of repair in some places. And so this zone here, which is quite an extensive part of the town centre, the inner part of the town, is where ideally the Environment Agency would not like us to allocate any land for development. At the same time, the present political administration are very keen and more or less instructed the planners not to touch the northern fringe. This sort of chimes with government policy, which requires us to focus on brownfield land, recycling existing land, and not developing greenfield wherever possible. But you can see it gives us a sort of sandwich effect between a flood risk area here and a green zone here, which are both to be kept free of development. In practice, we've, because of the nature of the regenerating waterfront and the Ipswich Village area here, which is where we are at present time, there is a lot of land that's ripe for redevelopment, and we therefore had to allocate it on the hope, expectation even, that the money will be allocated for a major improvement scheme to the flood defences over the planned period, which will enable development here to take place in a safer manner. Incidentally, it does affect the way we plan development now. We're encouraged not to put residential uses, as you'll probably have seen around town, on the ground floor. That's usually occupied by offices, retail uses, or car parking, to try and reduce the risk to the street level. So in terms of the structure of the town, we haven't got another Ansons, we haven't got another Ravenswood. So we can look at this one afterwards, but the allocation of land for the next plan period is very much a series of relatively small sites scattered across the town. And these tend to be things like older industrial sites that are no longer particularly viable, might be regarded as unneighbourly uses in some respects. So the planning is really dictated by these key constraints, and then the little opportunities that arise where we see sites that could accommodate our housing demand. So there really is no great plan to the shape of the way of shaping Ipswich over the coming period. It's more a question of where opportunity arises to create this network of small sites for development. Obviously, there's a strong emphasis on protecting existing green space. Ipswich is proud of its parks, and rightly so, and there are a number of major parks which will remain forever, we assume.
Because the other major constraint, if you like, is, you could say it's a sort of political constraint in that Ipswich is fairly tightly built up to its own boundaries. All this development out here is not in Ipswich, it's Kesgrave and Grange Farm area, that's all in the coastal areas, or Pinewood, and for those of you who know Tesco's and so on out on the southwest fringe, those who are born in Baber district. Bramford is out in mid-Suffolk, so there's development beyond the borough boundary, and at the moment the borough has made an application to become what's called a unitary authority, which means it takes on all the responsibilities that it did before 1974, including education and social services. That's been put on hold for a year while an organisation that used to be called the Boundary Commissioners, and that's called the Boundary Committee, look at the whole structure of local government in Suffolk and Norfolk. And one of the things they're looking at, for example, is the possible merger of the two deadly rivals, Lowestoft and Yarmouth, that have fairly major economic problems, which I suspect they can't solve individually, or between. But it will have something, may well have some implications for Ipswich. I think there was a feeling that perhaps, had the current proposals gone through, the boundary might have related to Ipswich bypass, which would have included some this land here, which is not in Ipswich. But clearly wouldn't have made a difference there. But the big question then would be, well, with no bypass on this side, although there may ultimately be a bypass in the north to provide, if you like, a sort of overall, almost a motorway box, so to speak, where the boundary would lie. It may well be that if it's larger, then clearly the sites that are available for allocation for land use and the housing allocations that are currently being made by the adjoining districts will relate to Ipswich, but we won't know about that until next year. So we have to go on the basis of the plan, on the basis of the boundary we've got. Clearly, as it is at the moment, if the boundary commissioners decide to change the boundaries of Ipswich and that comes into effect in 2010, so not so far away, well within the plan period, we would certainly have to rethink a number of these issues, because the basis of the management of them would change from being like a combination of the plans of the districts, all of which are at different stages, to be replaced by one that effectively is an extension of our own.
Yeah, because Ipswich, with the exception of the northern fringe, is pretty much developed up to its boundaries. That's the thing, it's full. Yeah, so that again reinforces this idea of developing inwards and trying to find the pockets of land within the town area rather than expanding outwards.
That's a big historic park. This is built up solidly. This is in a recreational use for sports fields and so on. There's the northern fringe that Phil's referred to, then that's built up solidly and goes beyond it. This is industrial. That's the Ravenswood development, which is now residential, and another part there. So effectively, the allocations in Ipswich are extremely constrained by the boundary.
An interesting point on the local government review issue. The government initially gave Ipswich the green light, which probably lots of you know, to go unitary, to break away from that lot over the road, Suffolk County Council. And then they changed their mind on the basis of a financial case, because Ipswich has a fairly high representation of houses in the lower bands for council tax. And Hazelby has decided we couldn't afford to run social services.